The move to a new neighborhood in April was meant as a fresh beginning. After the passing of my wife to cancer, it was just myself and my 7-year-old daughter, Lily, seeking a place untouched by the pervasive reminders of her mother. Our new home seemed ideal, boasting a spacious yard for Lily's play, access to reputable schools, and a nearby park. The initial interactions with our neighbors were largely congenial, marked by friendly waves and welcomes, with one notable exception: a woman residing 2 houses down, whose presence would soon cast a long shadow. The first encounter with this individual, Nancy, was immediate and unsettling. Her dog walk abruptly ceased the moment she observed Lily and me. My daughter, with her inherited blonde hair and blue eyes, spontaneously approached the animal. Nancy, however, abruptly pulled her pet away, pointedly asking Lily about her parents. When I identified myself as Lily's father, Nancy's gaze shifted between me and Lily, then returned to me, accompanied by a flat, disbelieving, "Sure you are." What I initially perceived as an ill-judged attempt at humor quickly revealed itself as a deeply serious, unnerving statement. From that point forward, Nancy began a persistent, intrusive observation of our lives. If Lily played in our front yard, Nancy would position herself at her window, capturing images. Our walks to the bus stop often saw Nancy trailing us from across the street, feigning attention to her mailbox for extended periods. While other residents simply dismissed her as overly curious, I recognized the underlying motivation for her scrutiny. The situation soon worsened. After Lily's playdate with a friend named Zoe, Zoe's mother contacted me, relaying Nancy's inquisitive call. Nancy had questioned Zoe's mother about the real story concerning the black man claiming to be Lily's father, coupling it with an unsubstantiated warning that I was probably dangerous. I immediately confronted Nancy, urging her to cease spreading falsehoods. Her response was that she was merely acting out of concern for a poor little girl who was obviously in danger. I then presented photographic evidence of my wife and me at the hospital during Lily's birth. Nancy dismissed these as easily fabricated images. 2 weeks later, while working at home, I observed 3 police vehicles arriving at my address. They informed me of a report concerning a kidnapped child being held at my residence. Nancy had placed the call, claiming to have witnessed a black man forcibly taking a crying white child into the house. Lily at the time was at school. I produced my identification, Lily's birth certificate from my desk, and numerous family photographs displayed throughout the house. The officers, apologetic, stated their obligation to investigate all calls. This scenario replayed itself 4 additional times over the next month, each instance triggered by Nancy observing me with Lily. The police department eventually conveyed their weariness to Nancy, cautioning her against filing further false reports, but her behavior persisted. The breaking point arrived when Nancy contacted Child Protective Services, alleging I was involved in child trafficking. A social worker appeared at Lily's school, removing her from class for an interview. Lily returned home, visibly distressed, questioning why someone wished to take her away from me. It was then I determined that Nancy required a definitive lesson. My investigation revealed Nancy's profession as a realtor, and that she was currently listing the most significant property of her career, a mansion valued at $2 million. An open house was scheduled for the upcoming Sunday, targeting affluent prospective buyers. I initiated contact with acquaintances from our previous neighborhood, extending an invitation for them to attend Nancy's open house. My former neighbors included my brother-in-law, Terrell, and his white wife, Amy, accompanied by their mixed-race children. My friend, Kenji, and his black wife, Rochelle, with their adopted white daughter, and our old neighbor, Louise, with his notably fair-skinned twin boys. Each family arrived at staggered intervals during the open house. Their presence visibly unsettled Nancy. She repeatedly inquired about how they learned of the listing and their genuine interest in purchasing, frequently interjecting comments suggesting the neighborhood might not be a suitable fit for their families. Kenji surreptitiously recorded Nancy, telling him the area lacked diversity, and his daughter might experience isolation. She advised Louise that his sons would likely prefer a more urban school district. She conveyed to Terrell that certain neighbors might harbor reservations regarding mixed-race families. The most impactful arrival, however, was Mr. Van Hutchinson, the mansion's owner, who had decided to observe the open house's progress. Nancy remained unaware of his identity, as their prior communication had been exclusively telephonic, with his white wife, Janet, managing all in-person interactions. When Mr. Van Hutchinson introduced himself, Nancy's complexion paled dramatically. He stepped forward from the gathering of potential buyers, extending his hand to Nancy. Her professional smile remained fixed, yet her eyes conveyed sheer panic as she automatically shook his hand. Mr. Van Hutchinson then gestured towards the grand staircase, directing Nancy away from the remaining visitors who, despite feigning admiration for the crown molding, were clearly attentive to the unfolding conversation. Nancy followed him, her heels clicking on the marble flooring. I positioned myself near the entrance, maintaining a clear vantage point. Mr. Van Hutchinson's voice carried just enough for me to discern phrases regarding neighborhood fit and diversity concerns. Nancy's face, initially pale, now flushed a bright red as she realized he had overheard her disparaging remarks to my friends. She began to speak rapidly, her hands gesticulating, words tumbling out about misunderstandings, context, and how her statements sounded worse than intended. A couple in designer attire exchanged glances and exited without a word. Another family collected their children, fabricating an excuse about needing to view other properties. Within 5 minutes, the open house was deserted, save for Nancy, Mr. Van Hutchinson, and myself standing by the entrance. My phone vibrated in my pocket. Kenji's text contained a video file, accompanied by a simple message. Got it all. I accessed the clip. The recording clearly showed Nancy advising him that his daughter might feel isolated in a neighborhood lacking diversity. The audio was pristine, her voice unmistakable. This was no longer rumor or insinuation. It was irrefutable evidence of Nancy's violation of fair housing laws, captured in her own words while she represented a property for sale. Mr. Van Hutchinson then approached me, leaving Nancy frozen by the staircase. He requested my contact information, retrieving his phone to save my number. His tone was calm, yet the tension in his jaw revealed his suppressed anger. He stated that a serious discussion about her conduct and his listing agreement was necessary, then exited the front door without awaiting her reply. I followed him out, acutely aware of Nancy's indignant stare on my back. The drive home, normally 20 minutes, felt compressed to 5. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, a blend of satisfaction and apprehension regarding the imminent consequences. Nancy would undoubtedly deduce my orchestration of the event. She would realize my strategic invitation of those particular families to expose her prejudice. The critical unknown was her subsequent reaction. Lily was safely enjoying a sleepover at Zoe's house, an arrangement that suddenly seemed fortuitously timed. Whatever aftermath ensued, at least my daughter would be spared its direct witness. I pulled into my driveway, remaining in the car for a minute, allowing the gravity of the situation to sink in. I had effectively derailed Nancy's most significant career opportunity. She would almost certainly lose the listing and likely face professional repercussions beyond that. A part of me experienced a flicker of guilt for having gone to such lengths. Then, the memory of Lily weeping after the CPS interview, questioning why someone desired to separate her from me, resurfaced. That recollection obliterated any lingering guilt. My phone rang around 7 o'clock that evening, as I reheated leftover pizza. Mr. Van Hutchinson's name appeared on the screen. He expressed gratitude for my role in exposing Nancy's true character before he entrusted her with the most substantial financial transaction of his life. His wife had always managed their in-person meetings, so he had never personally encountered Nancy until today. He confirmed his immediate termination of their contract and his intention to file a discrimination complaint with the State Real Estate Board. The conversation lasted approximately 10 minutes, and I could detect a note of disappointment in his voice. He had engaged Nancy based on her reputation and sales record, never contemplating that she would sabotage her own deal through prejudiced remarks. After our call concluded, I finished my pizza and attempted to watch television, but my mind raced through various potential scenarios. Nancy would be enraged. She had forfeited a substantial commission and likely her professional standing. I had achieved my objective, Yet I now faced the reality of residing 2 houses away from someone whose life I had just significantly disrupted. The following morning, as I prepared pancakes, movement outside the kitchen window caught my attention. Nancy was striding up my driveway, her phone clutched in one hand, her face contorted with fury. I deactivated the stove and stepped onto the porch before she could ring the doorbell. Under no circumstances would I permit her to disturb the neighborhood or create a scene that Lily might later overhear. Nancy halted at the base of my porch steps, breathing heavily, as if she had run the entire distance. She accused me of sabotaging her career, her voice trembling with anger. She declared that she had consulted her lawyer and intended to sue me for intentional interference with her business relationships. The words emerged quickly and sharply, each designed to wound. I maintained my composure, leaning against the porch railing with my arms crossed. I calmly pointed out that I had merely invited friends to a publicly advertised open house. The subsequent events, I explained, were entirely a consequence of her own words and actions. I had not compelled her to utter those remarks about diverse neighborhoods or urban school districts. She had chosen to articulate those sentiments, and now she faced the natural repercussions of her choices. Nancy's expression shifted, her anger fractured, revealing an almost desperate vulnerability. Tears began to stream down her face, and her voice became softer, more unstable. She claimed I had ruined her life over a few misunderstandings, asserting she had only been attempting to safeguard the neighborhood and ensure everyone's safety. Her words caused my jaw to clench. I stepped forward to the edge of the porch, informing her that calling the police on my daughter 4 times was not protection. Contacting CPS, resulting in Lily's removal from class, was not about safety. That, I stated unequivocally, was racism, plain and simple. And now, she was finally confronting the consequences of terrorizing a 7-year-old child. Nancy opened her mouth to retort, but no words emerged. She turned and walked back down the driveway, her shoulders shaking. Over the subsequent days, news of the open house incident permeated the neighborhood. The woman residing across the street delivered cookies, expressing her satisfaction that someone had finally challenged Nancy's intrusive behavior. 2 other neighbors, independently, conveyed that they had observed Nancy's conduct towards Lily and me for months, regretting their prior inaction. However, not all reactions were supportive. The couple 3 houses down offered cold glances when I waved from my yard. Another neighbor, with whom I had previously exchanged pleasantries at the bus stop, suddenly found reasons to avoid eye contact. The neighborhood was polarizing, and I sensed the escalating tension each time I stepped outside. Lily returned home from school that Wednesday with reddened eyes and a crumpled permission slip in her backpack. She dropped her bag by the door, informing me that a classmate's parent had instructed them to avoid our family due to our perceived troublemaking. My daughter inquired if we were bad people, if we had done something wrong. I pulled her onto the couch, attempting to explain that sometimes advocating for oneself creates discomfort for others. Yet this did not invalidate our position. The words felt hollow as I uttered them. Nancy's professional crisis was generating social repercussions that directly impacted my daughter, an outcome I had not anticipated. That night, after Lily was asleep, Terrell telephoned to warn me of Nancy's latest maneuver. She had been posting on neighborhood social media groups, portraying herself as a victim of targeting and harassment by new residents. While she refrained from naming me directly, the implications were clear to any observant reader. Some individuals, unaware of the full context, expressed sympathy, discussing the hardship of feeling insecure in one's own neighborhood. Terrell noted that a few sought both perspectives, but many readily accepted Nancy's victim narrative without question. I initially resolved to disregard the social media posts and concentrate on what truly mattered. However, 3 days later, Mr. Hutchinson called, inquiring about my willingness to provide a written statement for the State Real Estate Licensing Board. He stated that Nancy's behavior constituted a violation of fair housing laws, and he wished to ensure a formal record of her actions. I agreed without hesitation, spending the following evening at my kitchen table meticulously documenting every incident I could recall. Nancy's initial refusal to allow Lily to pet her dog, questioning her parentage, her surveillance from her window, capturing photographs, her following us to the bus stop under false pretenses, her phone call to Zoe's mother, disseminating lies about my perceived dangerousness. All 5 police visits instigated by her false reports, the CPS investigation that removed Lily from class, leaving her distressed about being taken away. Seeing the cumulative harassment detailed in a single document caused my hands to tremble. The ordeal appeared even more egregious on paper than it had felt during its experience. I submitted the statement to Mr. Hutchinson's attorney that Friday morning, striving to resume our routine. That weekend, Lily exhibited an unusual quietness, playing with her toys in the living room without genuine engagement. I suggested a trip to the park, but she merely shrugged, an uncharacteristic response. Finally, she looked up, her blue eyes, so reminiscent of her mother's, asking if we would have to relocate again because of people's dislike for us. That question struck me with greater force than any confrontation with Nancy. I sat beside her on the couch, pulling her close, grappling with how to explain racism to a 7-year-old who simply desired to play with friends and feel secure in her own community. I explained that some individuals hold erroneous beliefs about others based on appearance, and that Nancy's actions stem from this. I emphasized the importance of standing up for oneself when treated unfairly, acknowledging that sometimes doing the right thing initially complicates life before ultimately improving it. Lily inquired if Nancy's animosity derived from our differing skin colors. My heart fractured as I affirmed her suspicion. She then asked if others harbored similar prejudices, a truth I could not obscure. I reassured her that most of our neighbors were decent and kind, yet acknowledged that a few would always harbor issues with our family, and we could not permit those individuals to drive us from the home we had chosen. She nodded, appearing to comprehend, though I could perceive the weight of the situation settling upon her small shoulders. Monday afternoon, while working remotely, my phone rang with an unrecognized number. The caller identified herself as representing Nancy's real estate firm, informing me that Nancy had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into discrimination allegations. She inquired about any additional information or documentation I could provide. I informed her that all relevant materials had been submitted to the state licensing board. After ending the call, a surge of satisfaction arose, knowing Nancy faced genuine consequences at work, yet it mingled with an unsettling feeling as I glanced out my front window at her house, only 2 doors away. I had, in essence, declared war on a resident of the same street where my daughter played and rode her bicycle. That evening, Zoe's mother telephoned, immediately apologizing before I could even greet her. She explained that another parent had alleged I orchestrated an elaborate scheme to dismantle Nancy's career, and she wished to hear my direct account. I recounted the full timeline of Nancy's harassment, beginning from our initial move, the police visits, the CPS investigation, everything Nancy had subjected Lily to. Zoe's mother became silent, then expressed horror at her initial skepticism of my narrative. She admitted that when the other parent mentioned the open house incident, she had wondered if my response to Nancy's intrusiveness had been excessive. Now, she understood that Nancy's behavior constituted targeted racial harassment, not merely the actions of an overly concerned neighbor. She reiterated her apologies for her earlier lack of support, promising to ensure Zoe understood that Lily's family had committed no wrongdoing. I thanked her, feeling some of the tension in my chest subside, knowing at least one parent comprehended our ordeal. 2 days later, as I prepared dinner, a knock sounded at my front door. Opening it, I found one of the police officers who had responded to Nancy's false reports, now in civilian attire. He properly introduced himself, stating he was off duty, but wished to inform me that he had submitted his own statement to the real estate board, documenting Nancy's pattern of false emergency calls. He affirmed the wrongfulness of her actions towards my family, expressing satisfaction that consequences were finally unfolding, as officers like him had wasted valuable time and resources responding to her prejudiced paranoia instead of genuine emergencies. He shared his 15 years of police experience, lamenting the frequent weaponization of emergency services against black families, a practice he was weary of. I shook his hand, thanking him for his statement. After his departure, a fleeting thought occurred. Perhaps the system, for once, was functioning. That sentiment endured for precisely 2 weeks, until a certified letter requiring my signature arrived. The return address indicated an unfamiliar law firm. Upon opening it, my stomach sank. Nancy's attorney had issued a formal demand letter, threatening legal action for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with business relationships. The letter alleged I had orchestrated a coordinated harassment campaign against Nancy by bringing multiple families to her open house with the express intent of humiliating her and destroying her professional standing. It demanded payment of $50,000 in damages and a public apology to Nancy within 10 days, failing which a lawsuit would ensue. I reread the letter 3 times, struggling to process Nancy's audacious attempt to sue me after her extensive harassment of my family. I immediately contacted my friend Jessica, a law school graduate practicing family law in our former neighborhood. She agreed to review the letter immediately, calling me back within the hour. Jessica assessed most of it as intimidation tactics designed to deter me, yet advised treating it seriously enough to begin meticulous documentation in the event Nancy pursued a lawsuit. She offered to represent me at a reduced rate, citing our long-standing friendship and her assessment that Nancy's attorney was pursuing a weak case given Nancy's own documented history of harassment and false police reports. Jessica instructed me to gather all available evidence: police reports, CPS documentation, witness statements from neighbors, and Kenji's video recording from the open house. I spent the remainder of the evening compiling files and duplicating documents, simultaneously attempting to suppress anxieties about the potential financial cost of a legal battle, even with Jessica's reduced fee. That night, Lily awoke screaming from a nightmare about strangers attempting to abduct her. I rushed to her room, holding her as she wept, repeatedly expressing her reluctance to leave me and her incomprehension of why others sought to separate us. I realized the ongoing conflict with Nancy was re-triggering the trauma of the CPS investigation, particularly the incident when the social worker had removed her from class. The following morning, I contacted the child therapist recommended months prior by Lily's school counselor, scheduling an appointment for the upcoming week, convinced that my daughter's well-being superseded any victory against Nancy. The therapist's office called back that afternoon, notifying me of a cancellation and offering an earlier slot for Lily the following day, which I accepted. 3 days after receiving Nancy's demand letter, a process server appeared at my door, delivering a restraining order petition. Nancy had filed paperwork asserting I had harassed and threatened her, citing the open house incident and my friend's attendance as evidence of a coordinated intimidation campaign. The petition depicted me as aggressive and dangerous, expressing fear for her safety due to my demonstrated willingness to harm her livelihood, implying a potential escalation to physical violence. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I stood in my doorway, holding the documents, a fierce rage burning through my chest at Nancy's audacity in distorting events to portray herself as the victim. I immediately contacted Jessica, who instructed me to visit her office the next morning to prepare a response. That night, sleep evaded me as I pondered Nancy's impudence in claiming harassment, given her treatment of Lily and me. Jessica and I spent 4 hours the following day preparing a counterpetition, meticulously documenting Nancy's year-long harassment, the false police reports, the CPS investigation that had traumatized Lily. We gathered statements from the police officers who had responded to Nancy's calls, from Zoe's mother regarding Nancy's defamatory phone call, and from 3 neighbors who had witnessed Nancy's surveillance and her following us to the bus stop. Jessica asserted we possessed a robust case demonstrating Nancy's sustained campaign of racial harassment against my family, and that her restraining order petition was merely another attempt to weaponize the legal system against us. She filed our counterpetition with the court, dispatching a copy to Nancy's attorney along with all supporting documentation. I departed Jessica's office feeling a marginal improvement in our legal standing, yet utterly exhausted by the relentless conflict which showed no immediate signs of abatement. The neighborhood became sharply divided in the aftermath of the courthouse drama. Some residents ceased making eye contact when I retrieved mail or worked in the front yard, suddenly finding urgent tasks inside their homes the moment I appeared outdoors. Others adopted the opposite extreme. The man 3 doors down now waved effusively each time he saw me, as if we were newfound confidants. The couple with the German Shepherd deliberately paused to converse whenever they walked past. This forced polarization, over an issue that should have never necessitated sides, felt profoundly unsettling. 2 days after the hearing, the woman residing directly across the street appeared on my porch, offering a plate of chocolate chip cookies. She introduced herself as Margaret, revealing her 15 years of residency on the street. She confided that Nancy had presented problems for nearly everyone at various times. Photographing lawns if the grass grew too long, contacting code enforcement over prematurely placed trash bins, and disseminating gossip about anyone who deviated from her idealized neighborhood image. Margaret expressed her relief that someone had finally pushed back decisively enough to compel Nancy to reconsider her behavior. I thanked her for the cookies, finding a measure of solace in the knowledge that I was not the sole recipient of Nancy's eccentricities over the years. 3 weeks elapsed, a new, tenuous normal settling around us. Lily appeared outwardly fine, attending school, completing homework, and playing with her toys. Then, her teacher telephoned me one afternoon. She noted Lily's recent quietness, her decreased participation in class discussions, and her preference for solitary play during recess. That morning, Lily had argued with a classmate whose parents had instructed them to avoid our family, labeling us as troublemakers. The teacher had intervened before it escalated physically, but Lily spent the remainder of the day appearing on the verge of tears. Hearing this, my stomach dropped. My singular focus on battling Nancy and asserting my righteousness had blinded me to the profound impact this entire situation was having on my daughter. Lily was no longer merely contending with Nancy's racism. She was now grappling with a reputation as a troublemaker at school, experiencing lost friendships due to parents' anxieties about neighborhood drama, and bearing the weight of a conflict she neither initiated nor controlled. I realized my pursuit of justice was inadvertently depriving Lily of the very things we had sought by moving here: safety, belonging, and a fresh start free from the grief of losing her mother. Instead, I had drawn her into a different form of pain, one created by my choice of retribution over peace. The restraining order hearing convened on a Tuesday morning at the county courthouse. I sat at a table with my lawyer, Nancy positioned across the aisle with hers. The courtroom was smaller than anticipated, comprising only the judge's bench, a few rows of seats, and fluorescent lighting that cast a washed-out, somber glow. Nancy took the stand first, her attorney guiding her through her version of events. She recounted feeling unsafe in her own neighborhood due to my alleged organization of a group to publicly humiliate her at her workplace. She described the open house incident as a coordinated assault designed to dismantle her career and reputation. Her voice trembled as she spoke of the successive arrival of those families, her sense of being targeted and harassed, and her sleepless nights, knowing I resided merely 2 houses away, potentially escalating the conflict. Her attorney presented the open house situation as proof of my vindictive character and a pattern of retaliation, arguing that someone willing to sabotage another's livelihood over a misunderstanding might next resort to physical violence. Nancy shed a few tears while discussing her job loss and her inability to meet mortgage payments, portraying me as a monster who had needlessly destroyed an innocent woman's life. When it was our turn, my lawyer rose and systematically presented the evidence we had amassed. She provided copies of every police report stemming from Nancy's false accusations of my kidnapping Lily. She showed the judge documentation from the CPS investigation, conclusively demonstrating Nancy's fabrication regarding my alleged trafficking of my daughter. She produced written statements from 3 distinct neighbors who had witnessed Nancy following us to the bus stop and observing Lily from her window, taking photographs. She included the statement from Zoe's mother concerning Nancy's phone call, disseminating lies about my perceived dangerousness. Then, she played Kenji's video recording from the open house. The judge leaned forward, watching Nancy explicitly tell Kenji that the neighborhood lacked diversity and his daughter might feel isolated, advising Louise that his sons would prefer a more urban school district, and informing Terrell that certain neighbors might harbor issues with mixed-race families. The video clearly depicted Nancy making these statements unprompted, without responding to questions or external pressure. My lawyer underscored that Nancy's discriminatory remarks at the open house were not a consequence of my presence or any supposed harassment campaign. Rather, they revealed Nancy's true character to prospective home buyers who happened to be families of color. The judge's expression transitioned from neutral to skeptical as the evidence accumulated. He began to view Nancy differently, seeing through her victim narrative to the underlying reality. The judge took approximately 5 minutes to render his decision after both sides concluded their presentations. He denied Nancy's restraining order petition outright. He stated that the evidence clearly demonstrated a pattern of harassment by Nancy towards my family, predating any actions I took at the open house. He noted that attending a public open house with friends did not, by any legal definition, constitute harassment or stalking. He then cautioned both of us to maintain distance from each other going forward. He concluded that the situation had devolved into a neighborhood conflict that served no one's interests, particularly those of the children involved. He suggested serious consideration of mediation to resolve our issues before further escalation. He dismissed the case, declaring us free to depart. I felt relief at the denial of Nancy's restraining order, yet also profound exhaustion from the entire process. The relentless conflict, legal skirmishes, and pervasive stress had utterly depleted me. Exiting the courthouse into the parking lot, I observed Nancy glaring at me from approximately 50 feet away. Her face bore a tight, angry expression, indicating her continued resolve, despite her legal defeat. Her lawyer was speaking to her, but she appeared unresponsive, her gaze fixed on me with unadulterated hatred. It was evident that, for her, this was far from over. Her job loss had not been sufficient punishment in her mind. Her court defeat had not sufficed. She desired to persist until one of us was utterly destroyed, implying that the struggle continued for Lily and me as well. We were trapped in a self-perpetuating cycle of retaliation and vengeance, escalating in scope and complexity, with no end in sight. I walked to my car feeling as though I had won a battle, but was simultaneously losing the war. The victory felt hollow and ephemeral, akin to applying a bandage to a wound requiring stitches. That evening, I arrived home around 6 o'clock to find Lily weeping on her bed. I could hear her muffled sobs from the hallway before even opening her bedroom door, her face buried in her pillow. I sat beside her, rubbing her back until she looked up, her eyes red and swollen. She disclosed overhearing my phone conversation with my lawyer earlier, discussing the case and the restraining order hearing. She inquired why the lady harbored such animosity towards us, and why we couldn't simply relocate somewhere where people were kind. She expressed longing for our old neighborhood, where no one seemed to care about racial differences and children simply played together without parental interference. She then asked if Nancy's dislike stemmed from her appearance, from our differing skin colors. That question shattered my heart into myriad pieces. My 7-year-old daughter was internalizing a grown woman's racism, blaming herself. I pulled her into an embrace, reassuring her that none of this was her fault, that Nancy's issues were unrelated to Lily or her inherent beauty. Yet, I perceived Lily's disbelief. She had carried this burden for months, contemplating whether a different appearance or demeanor might have appeased Nancy. The following morning, I accompanied Lily to her therapy appointment. The therapist had been seeing her bi-weekly since the CPS investigation had traumatized her at school. We waited in the reception area, amidst its drab magazines and artificial plants, until the therapist called us in. She spoke with Lily privately for 30 minutes while I waited outside. Then, she invited me for the final portion of the session. The therapist chose her words carefully, but her message was unambiguous. Continuing the conflict with Nancy might be inflicting more harm on Lily than Nancy's initial harassment. She noted Lily's increased anxiety over the past month, rather than improvement. The nightmares had returned. The withdrawn behavior at school was a new development. Lily was beginning to perceive herself as the catalyst for adult problems, rather than simply being a child. The therapist emphasized Lily's need for stability and peace, prioritizing these above witnessing her father prevail in a conflict with a prejudiced neighbor. She suggested that sometimes, protecting one's child necessitated disengaging from battles one had every right to win. I sat there, feeling simultaneously defensive and ashamed. Defensive, because I was defending my family against genuine discrimination. Ashamed, because perhaps my drive for justice had overshadowed my daughter's need for normalcy. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, contemplating whether my need for Nancy to face repercussions was justifiable given the emotional cost to Lily. The question endlessly looped in my mind. I did not wish to teach my daughter that retreating from racism was the answer. I did not want her to grow up believing we should passively accept discrimination and harassment to preserve peace. Yet, I also did not wish to sacrifice her childhood to prove a point to a neighbor who, in all likelihood, would never change. I reflected on my wife and what she would have advised. She had always counseled, choose your battles carefully and ensure the fight is worth what it costs your family. I was no longer certain this particular battle justified the price Lily was paying. She had already endured the profound loss of her mother. Now, she was losing her sense of safety and belonging because I couldn't relinquish the desire to make Nancy suffer for her actions. Perhaps I had already achieved sufficient victory by exposing Nancy's racism and contributing to her job loss. Perhaps continued engagement merely fueled my own anger, rather than genuinely protecting my daughter. The Neighborhood Gossip Network delivered the news 3 days later. Margaret, from across the street, knocked on my door that afternoon, informing me that Nancy's real estate firm had concluded its investigation. Nancy's employment had been terminated that morning. The official rationale cited violations of fair housing laws and the creation of liability for the company. Margaret had heard this from another neighbor, who in turn had heard it from someone employed at the same firm. News traveled swiftly on our street when dramatic events unfolded. A surge of satisfaction enveloped me upon hearing of Nancy's job loss. She had spent months attempting to disrupt my life, and now her career was over, a direct consequence of her own actions. That sense of justice lingered for approximately 10 seconds. Then, the satisfaction transmuted into something else. Unease, apprehension, perhaps even guilt. Nancy had just lost her income and her professional reputation. She was likely spiraling into desperation. Desperate individuals, I knew, often acted unpredictably. I wondered if her termination would finally bring an end to this conflict, or if it would merely render her more dangerous. 2 days after learning of Nancy's job loss, I walked to my car one morning to drive Lily to school and immediately spotted the damage. Someone had keyed the entire driver's side, deep scratches running from the front door to the rear bumper. This, however, was not the worst of it. A racist slur had been etched into the hood, the letters large enough to be legible from the street. I stood there, staring, as my stomach churned. Lily ran out with her backpack, stopping abruptly as she observed my expression. She inquired about the problem, and I instructed her to return inside. Her gaze then fell upon the car, and she saw the offensive word before I could shield her view. Her face paled, and she asked me its meaning. I took her hand, leading her back into the house, explaining it was simply a hateful word used by unkind people. I contacted the police and filed a report while Lily ate breakfast inside. The responding officer photographed the damage and meticulously documented the incident, though he candidly stated that without witnesses or surveillance footage, identifying the perpetrator was unlikely. He asked if I suspected anyone. I mentioned Nancy's job loss 2 days prior. He recorded this information, but noted that timing alone did not constitute proof. After his departure, I contacted my insurance company to arrange for the car's repair. I then sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee, trying to formulate an explanation for Lily's school regarding her lateness. Throughout this, my thoughts fixated on Nancy, pondering whether she was indeed responsible, or if the timing was merely coincidental. A part of me wished it were her, as it would at least provide a clear adversary. Yet another part hoped it was not, for if Nancy had escalated to property damage and racist vandalism, the situation was poised to become considerably worse. I spent the remainder of the day arranging the car repairs, striving to suppress thoughts of my daughter seeing that word etched into our car, in our own driveway. The insurance company confirmed coverage, but I faced a $500 deductible. $500, because Nancy refused to be held accountable for her racism. I dropped Lily off at school late. She inquired 3 times if we were safe at home, Each question tightened a knot in my chest. This was precisely what I had sought to avoid by moving here after my wife's death. I desired Lily to feel secure, normal, a typical child. Instead, she was asking her father about their safety within their own home, because a neighbor had harassed us for months, and now someone had defaced our car with a racial slur. I collected Lily from school that afternoon. She remained unusually quiet throughout the drive home. Upon our arrival, she expressed no desire to play outside, instead sitting on the couch with her tablet, periodically glancing out the front window as if anticipating something. I prepared dinner, but she barely ate. That night, as I tucked her into bed, she asked if the person who had damaged our car would return. I reassured her no, suggesting it was likely an isolated incident, though I harbored personal doubts. After she fell asleep, I sat in the living room, all lights extinguished, observing the street through the window. Every passing car caused me to tense. Every shifting shadow in a neighbor's yard prompted speculation about Nancy's next move. The next morning, Lily entered my room before my alarm sounded, asking if we could stay at Amy and Terrell's house for a while. She articulated a feeling of insecurity within our home. I sat up in bed, observing my 7-year-old daughter, standing there in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and something within me broke. We had relocated to this neighborhood for a fresh start after the devastating loss of her mother. We had specifically chosen this house because it exuded a sense of safety and welcome. Now, my daughter requested to leave, no longer feeling secure here. I pulled her onto the bed, embracing her, assuring her we would find a solution. She inquired if we could depart that very day. I promised to contact Amy after breakfast. We ate cereal in silence. Then, I telephoned my sister-in-law while Lily packed a bag in her room. Amy answered on the second ring. I explained the car vandalism and Lily's plea. Amy did not hesitate, insisting we bring Lily over immediately and stay as long as necessary. I thanked her, hung up, and helped Lily finish packing. We drove to Amy and Terrell's house across town. Lily brightened slightly as her cousins ran out to greet her. Amy led Lily and the children inside, while Terrell accompanied me back to my car. He inquired about my well-being. I admitted truthfully that I was no longer certain. He placed a hand on my shoulder, assuring me we would navigate this together. I returned to our house alone, spending the afternoon working remotely, trying to ignore the profound emptiness created by Lily's absence. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, the woman residing across the street knocked on my door. Her name, though I couldn't recall it, was associated with a generally friendly demeanor, marked by shared waves outdoors. She stood on my porch, appearing uneasy, and asked for a moment of my time. I admitted her, and she settled on the edge of my couch, suggesting a brief stay. She mentioned having heard about Nancy's job loss and the vandalism to my car. Then, she shared something that compelled my full attention. She revealed that Nancy's husband had passed away 3 years prior from a sudden heart attack. He had collapsed while mowing the lawn one Saturday morning, gone by the time paramedics arrived. After this tragedy, Nancy had undergone a profound change, becoming more vigilant and controlling of the neighborhood. Apparently, she had contacted the police on several neighbors over the years for minor infractions, such as parking too close to her driveway or prematurely placing trash bins, and spread gossip about anyone who did not conform to her ideal of the neighborhood. The woman suggested that while Nancy had always been somewhat rigid, her husband's death had exacerbated these tendencies, as if she sought to control her surroundings in response to her inability to control her personal loss. She emphasized that this did not excuse Nancy's behavior toward Lily and me, but she felt I should understand there was a more complex backstory than simple racism. After her departure, I pondered her revelations. The information about Nancy's deceased husband lingered, complicating everything beyond my preference for a simpler narrative. It would have been easier to maintain Nancy as a purely prejudiced neighbor who had received her just deserts. But now, I knew she was also a widow who had witnessed her husband's sudden death and, apparently, had processed that trauma by becoming the worst version of herself. I considered my own grief and how I had reacted to my wife's death by moving us to a new neighborhood, striving to control our environment and ensure Lily's safety and predictability. Nancy had also reacted to her loss by attempting to control her environment, but her method involved harassment, prejudice, and making my daughter's life miserable. We were both single parents who had lost our spouses, both attempting to safeguard our sense of security in a world that had, without warning, demonstrated its capacity to strip everything away. Both, in the process, making choices that affected others. The distinction lay in my choices stemming from a desire to protect my daughter from a genuine threat, whereas Nancy's choices arose from perceiving threats that did not exist. Or perhaps she perceived real threats but misdirected her fear. Regardless, her backstory did not absolve her actions, yet it imbued her with a slightly more human, complicated dimension in my mind. I harbored no desire to feel empathy for Nancy. I wished to remain angry for her terrorization of my daughter, for contacting CPS, and for making Lily question why someone sought to separate us. Yet, I could not suppress thoughts of how grief had warped both of us into individuals willing to hurt others in pursuit of a renewed sense of safety. My lawyer telephoned the following afternoon while I worked at Amy and Terrell's kitchen table. She informed me that Nancy's attorney had initiated contact regarding a potential settlement of the lawsuit. Nancy was offering to withdraw all legal threats if I agreed to pursue no further action against her. It was, in essence, a proposal for a mutual ceasefire, both parties disengaging and leaving each other undisturbed. My lawyer strongly advised considering it. She reminded me that continuing the fight would incur additional legal fees, more court time, and increased stress for Lily. She pointed out that Nancy had already faced significant consequences, losing her job and professional standing. The real estate board investigation, she added, was ongoing and would proceed irrespective of my decision. My lawyer suggested that sometimes the optimal outcome was not absolute victory, but securing enough justice to feel vindicated while safeguarding oneself from further harm. I promised to consider it and call her back. After hanging up, I stared blankly at my laptop screen. A part of me yearned to reject the settlement and continue fighting until Nancy paid for every transgression against us. Yet, another part of me was weary of conflict and concerned about its ongoing impact on Lily. That evening, after the children were asleep, I discussed the settlement offer with Terrell and Amy. In their living room, I laid out all the options and their potential ramifications. Terrell listened, then asked what my wife would have wanted me to do. I sat, reflecting on our past conversations about raising a mixed-race child in America and her frequent counsel to carefully select my battles. Amy leaned forward, asserting that I had already achieved my objective of ensuring Nancy faced professional consequences. She underscored Nancy's job loss, her ruined reputation, and the probable loss of her real estate license. Amy contended that continuing the fight at this juncture was no longer about justice, but revenge, and revenge, she stated, was harming Lily more than it was harming Nancy. Terrell concurred, reminding me of Lily's request to stay at their house due to feeling unsafe at home. He emphasized that the conflict had already cost Lily her sense of security, and further escalation might cost her even more. I knew they were correct, but acknowledging it felt difficult. I had endured months of Nancy's harassment and had finally gained the upper hand. Walking away from that felt like a defeat, even though, logically, it was the prudent choice. Amy reached over, squeezing my hand, and told me that sometimes being a good parent meant swallowing one's pride and prioritizing a child's well-being over personal satisfaction. That night, sleep eluded me at Amy and Terrell's house. I lay in their guest room bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything that had transpired since our April move. My wife had been gone for over a year, yet I still instinctively wished to consult her in such situations. She had always possessed a knack for discerning the larger picture, while I often became entangled in immediate conflicts. I rose around 2 in the morning, walking down the hall to the room where Lily slept with her cousins. I stood in the doorway, watching her peaceful slumber, a tranquility that had eluded her at our own house for weeks. I reflected on the many conversations my wife and I had shared about the challenges Lily would face as a mixed-race child. We had agreed to instill in her the importance of self-advocacy and a refusal to tolerate discrimination. Yet, my wife had also consistently advised careful battle selection, ensuring the fight justified its cost to the family. My singular focus on making Nancy accountable had prevented me from considering the ongoing toll on Lily. The answer was now starkly evident. It was costing her the ability to sleep peacefully in her own bed, in her own house. It was costing her the sense of safety and belonging we had sought in this new neighborhood. My wife, I knew, would have affirmed that I had already triumphed in the crucial battle by exposing Nancy's racism and contributing to her termination. She would have asserted that continued engagement was now driven by my ego, rather than by protecting our daughter. I resolved to accept the settlement offer the following morning. Before Lily awoke, I telephoned my lawyer, instructing her to contact Nancy's attorney and finalize the details. It felt like a simultaneous experience of losing and winning, a complex reality I was increasingly coming to understand about most real-life resolutions. There was no clean, satisfying ending where the antagonist suffered total annihilation and everyone lived blissfully ever after. Instead, there were intricate compromises where no one achieved all their desires. Yet, hopefully, everyone gained enough to move forward. My lawyer confirmed she would draft the agreement for signing by week's end. I thanked her, hung up, and prepared breakfast for Lily and her cousins. Lily entered the kitchen, asking if we could return home that day. I replied that perhaps in a few days, after I had sorted some things out. She nodded, eating her cereal, and I watched her, wondering if I had made the correct decision. The only way to ascertain that, I realized, was to observe how events unfolded from this point forward. The week after we signed the settlement agreement, Lily experienced a particularly difficult therapy session. The therapist called me afterward, requesting a meeting. I drove there during my lunch break, sitting in her office as she recounted what had transpired. Lily had spent most of the session expressing her feeling that the conflict with Nancy was her fault, stemming from her appearance. She had told the therapist that if she looked more like me, Nancy would not have suspected kidnapping, and none of this would have occurred. The therapist explained that Lily was internalizing the situation as being about her physical traits, rather than about Nancy's racism. She was blaming herself for her blonde hair and blue eyes, instead of comprehending that the problem lay in Nancy's prejudice and fear. Hearing that my daughter had internalized this conflict as her own failing made me feel sick. I had spent months fighting to prove Nancy's wrongdoing, yet somehow, Lily had come to believe she was the issue. The therapist noted this was a common phenomenon among children in such situations. Lacking the life experience to grasp systemic racism or adult prejudice, they sought explanations that made sense to them, often leading to self-blame. She affirmed that my decision to end the legal battle and prioritize Lily's well-being was precisely the correct course of action. She stated that over time, with ongoing therapy and support, Lily would come to understand that Nancy's actions were never about her. But for now, concluding the conflict and providing Lily with stability was paramount. 3 days after signing the settlement papers, I drove to the grocery store, needing milk and bread for Lily's lunches. The store was largely empty on a Tuesday morning, allowing for a quick, anonymous visit, avoiding encounters with neighborhood residents. I grabbed a cart, heading towards the dairy section, mentally listing other household necessities. Turning into the cereal aisle, I saw her. Nancy stood approximately 15 feet away, holding a box of granola, intently examining the nutrition label as if it held profound secrets. My entire body stiffened, and I halted, one hand still on the cart handle. At that precise moment, she looked up and our eyes met. For about 3 seconds, we remained frozen, two individuals who had spent months making each other's lives miserable, now unexpectedly trapped in the same suburban grocery aisle. Nancy's face registered a rapid sequence of expressions, beginning with surprise and culminating in an uncomfortable recognition. I nodded once, a brief dip of my chin, neither friendly nor overtly hostile. She returned the gesture identically, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then, without a word, we both turned and walked in opposite directions. My heart pounded as I pushed my cart towards the dairy coolers, noticing my hands trembled slightly on the handle. The entire encounter likely lasted only 10 seconds, yet it felt considerably longer, as if time had elongated to prolong the awkwardness. I quickly retrieved the milk and exited, glancing over my shoulder to confirm Nancy was not in the checkout line before proceeding myself. My phone rang 2 days later while I worked at my desk. Mr. Hutchinson's name appeared on the screen. I answered, and he inquired about our well-being, his voice warm and genuinely concerned. I informed him that things were settling down now that the legal matters were concluded. He expressed satisfaction at this news, then mentioned he had successfully sold his mansion the previous week through a different realtor, one who treated everyone with respect, regardless of their appearance. The sale had proceeded without incident, and the new owners were relocating next month. I congratulated him. He thanked me again for exposing Nancy's true character, stating that had I not organized that open house, he would have entrusted her with the most significant financial transaction of his life, unknowingly subjected to her discrimination against potential buyers. Then he delivered unexpected news. The real estate board investigation was still ongoing, despite Nancy and I having settled our personal lawsuit. Apparently, the board took fair housing violations seriously, conducting its own independent review of Nancy's conduct, separate from any private legal action. Mr. Hutchinson confirmed he had provided a comprehensive statement about the open house events, and the board had interviewed several of the could have apologized and altered her conduct, but she chose instead to escalate. The fact that her choices resulted in job loss and the necessity of selling her home did not render me responsible for those outcomes. I knew she was correct, yet it still felt complicated, as if I had won a battle I was not entirely comfortable winning. 2 weeks later, an unfamiliar car pulled into my driveway on a Saturday afternoon. A woman, perhaps in her 30s, emerged, and I observed from the window as she approached my front door. I opened it before she could knock. She introduced herself as Nancy's daughter, visiting from out of state to assist her mother with the impending move. She inquired if she could speak with me for a few minutes. I assented, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me to prevent Lily from overhearing. Nancy's daughter offered an apology for her mother's behavior, expressing her horror upon learning of her mother's actions towards our family. She explained that Nancy had been grappling with anxiety and control issues since her father's death 4 years prior, becoming increasingly fixated on monitoring the neighborhood and feeling compelled to protect it from perceived threats. The daughter confided that her mother had always held certain prejudiced views, but these had intensified after her husband's death, as if she sought someone to blame for her pervasive sense of insecurity. She wished me to understand that Nancy was now receiving professional help, seeing a therapist specializing in grief and anxiety, and beginning to comprehend how her fear had transmuted into racism that harmed innocent people. The daughter emphasized that none of this excused Nancy's actions, but she hoped it provided insight that her mother was not purely malicious, but rather an individual who had processed loss in the most detrimental way possible. I listened, uncertain how to respond. A part of me appreciated the apology and the contextualization. Another part harbored anger that I was expected to feel sympathy for Nancy, given her terrorization of my daughter. I thanked the daughter for her visit, expressing my hope that her mother received the help she required, and I meant it, despite my complex emotions. Nancy's daughter's visit lingered with me for days, unsettling me in ways I couldn't fully articulate. It was simpler to despise Nancy when she was merely the prejudiced neighbor who had summoned the police to my family. Learning about her deceased husband, her anxiety, and her therapy sessions humanized her, complicating my anger. I harbored no desire to feel empathy for someone who had inflicted such pain upon Lily, yet I could not ignore that Nancy was a person grappling with her own struggles in destructive ways. I found myself contemplating my wife and our respective reactions to her cancer diagnosis. I had striven to be strong and supportive during her illness, but after her death, I had experienced a period of pervasive anger directed at everything and everyone. My anger had never manifested as racism, but I understood how grief could distort one's thinking, prompting actions one might otherwise avoid. This did not excuse Nancy's behavior, but it allowed me to perceive her as more than just a villain in our narrative. She was a widow who had lost her way, harming others in the process, and was now facing consequences while also seeking help. The entire situation felt messy and convoluted, rather than the clean, simple resolution I had desired. 3 days after Nancy's daughter's visit, she telephoned, inquiring if Nancy could apologize to Lily directly before their move. Every instinct screamed to shield Lily from any further contact with the woman who had so thoroughly frightened her. I stated my need to consider it and consult Lily's therapist first. At our next session, I raised the request. The therapist then asked for my own thoughts. I expressed my desire to keep Nancy as far removed from my daughter as possible. The therapist nodded, then suggested that a direct apology from Nancy might actually provide Lily with closure, helping her comprehend that Nancy's behavior was unrelated to any wrongdoing on Lily's part. She explained that children who experience this type of targeting often internalize it, blaming themselves, and witnessing the adult take full accountability could help Lily differentiate Nancy's actions from her own identity. I remained unconvinced initially, but the therapist outlined the apology session protocol. It would occur in her office, with her continuous presence. I could terminate it at any moment if Lily appeared distressed. Nancy would apologize, explaining her behavior was wrong and entirely unrelated to Lily or her appearance. Lily could then respond as she wished, or not at all. The therapist emphasized she would only recommend this if she believed it would benefit Lily, not harm her. I discussed it with Lily that evening, explaining Nancy's desire to apologize and asking if Lily wished to hear it. Lily pondered for a minute, then replied, yes. She wished for Nancy to apologize. So, I telephoned Nancy's daughter, agreeing to a supervised meeting at the therapist's office the following week. The day of the apology session, I drove Lily to the therapist's office, my stomach churning with apprehension. Nancy was already present upon our arrival, seated in the waiting room, appearing smaller and older than I remembered. We all entered the therapist's office and sat down, Lily and I on the couch, Nancy in a chair opposite us, the therapist in her usual spot. Nancy looked at Lily, apologizing for frightening her, for all the time she had contacted the police, and for making Lily feel unsafe in her own home. She assured Lily that her behavior was entirely wrong and bore no relation to anything Lily had done or how Lily looked. Nancy explained she had been struggling with her own problems and fears, handling them in terrible ways that had harmed innocent people. She informed Lily she was now seeking help to prevent treating anyone else as she had treated our family. Nancy then stated her understanding if Lily could not forgive her, but wished Lily to know that none of it was Lily's fault. Throughout Nancy's address, I intently observed Lily's face for any signs of distress, prepared to end the session if necessary. However, Lily sat calmly, her hands folded in her lap, listening. When Nancy finished, Lily remained silent for a moment, then declared she forgave Nancy, but did not wish to be friends. The maturity of that response astonished me. My 7-year-old daughter had just accepted an apology while simultaneously establishing a clear boundary regarding her willingness to engage further. Nancy thanked Lily, acknowledging her understanding. The entire session lasted perhaps 15 minutes. Nancy then departed, leaving just Lily, the therapist, and me. After Nancy left, the therapist asked Lily how she felt. Lily stated she felt better, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her chest. She explained that hearing Nancy admit it wasn't her fault resonated more deeply than when others had told her the same thing. The therapist smiled, commending Lily's handling of the situation with remarkable grace and strength. We conversed for a few more minutes, then headed home. In the car, Lily seemed lighter, gazing out the window and humming along to the radio, rather than sitting in her usual quiet, tense demeanor. That evening, she played in the backyard for an hour, running and laughing in a way I hadn't witnessed since before this ordeal began. At bedtime, she hugged me with extra tightness, expressing her relief that we no longer needed to worry about Nancy. After I tucked her in, the therapist called to check in. She reiterated that witnessing Nancy take accountability had helped Lily understand that the problem was never about her or our family. It was about Nancy's issues. She emphasized that children benefit from seeing adults own their mistakes and apologize sincerely, and that this experience had imparted Lily with a crucial lesson in accountability and forgiveness, one that would serve her well as she matured. Less than a week after the settlement agreement was finalized, the for sale sign appeared in front of Nancy's house. I observed it from my living room window while making coffee one morning. A strange sensation twisted in my chest, neither pure satisfaction nor relief. Just 2 weeks later, a moving truck pulled up to the house on a Saturday afternoon. A young couple emerged, the woman black, the man white, with a baby strapped to the woman's chest in a carrier. From my porch, I watched them standing on the sidewalk, the man gesturing toward something on the roof, while the woman bounced the baby and nodded. They noticed me watching and waved. I walked over to introduce myself. The woman's name was Jasmine, her husband was Chris, and their baby girl appeared no older than 6 months. Jasmine mentioned they had heard about some recent drama on the street, but expressed their desire for a fresh start with everyone, hoping the neighborhood would be welcoming. I greeted them warmly and offered assistance with moving boxes if needed. Chris inquired about the previous owner and why she had sold so rapidly. I simply stated she was relocating for family reasons, leaving it at that. Jasmine smiled, remarking that was good, as they desired no negative energy in their new home. I contemplated how Nancy would have reacted to seeing this family move into her house. The baby began to fuss, and Jasmine excused herself to feed her. Chris thanked me again for the warm welcome before returning to unpack the truck. Walking back to my house, I made a conscious decision not to recount the full story of Nancy or to perpetuate the conflict through gossip. They seemed like good people, striving to establish a home, and their baby, with her large brown eyes, was adorable. I wished to focus on that, rather than dwelling on the past with Nancy. Lily came outside, inquiring about the new neighbors. I informed her it was a nice family with a baby. She became excited about the prospect of babysitting when she was older. 3 days after Jasmine and Chris moved in, Mr. Hutchinson telephoned me around dinner time. He inquired about my well-being and if I had noticed Nancy's house had sold. I confirmed, adding it was a nice young family. He paused, then announced news regarding the State Real Estate Board investigation. They had completed their review and decided to suspend Nancy's license for 2 years, requiring ethics training before she could even apply for reinstatement. Mr. Hutchinson stated the board had taken the matter seriously, due to the fair housing violations and the pattern of discriminatory behavior he had documented in his complaint. He also mentioned Nancy was relocating to another state to reside near her daughter and make a fresh start where her past was unknown. I thanked him for pursuing the complaint and for calling to inform me. He expressed his satisfaction that things had resolved and hoped my daughter was faring better. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table, contemplating Nancy's license suspension and her compelled relocation, having to start completely anew. A part of me felt vindicated, knowing real consequences had emerged from her actions. Yet another part experienced a strange unease at the thoroughness of her life's unraveling. I repeatedly thought of what her daughter had told me about Nancy's struggles with grief and control issues, and how Nancy had lost her husband in a manner similar to my loss of my wife. This did not absolve the racism, the harassment, or the